Now available in paperback and Kindle Unlimited, The Man Crisis. Learn why so many men are struggling to find their way in an increasingly gynocentric world in The Man Crisis. Get your copy of The Man Crisis in paperback and Kindle Unlimited today. One of my viewers wanted me to do another installment in the Historical Men in Crisis series. And for this installment in the Historical Men in Crisis series, I'm going to be talking about Jason McGaughan, one of the victims of Menju Mark Wu, who was shot and killed over a gambling debt. Historical Men in Crisis. Now, Jason McGaughan is one of the three unfortunate victims who wound up losing his life at the hands of Menju Mark Wu, who shot and killed all three of these individuals over a gambling debt. And Jason McGaughan possibly wound up on the road to his demise that put him on the road to becoming a man in crisis due to the way he was raised by his mother and his father. Now, Jason McGaughan's father was a beta male who was addicted to gambling ever since he was 8 years old, and he possibly wound up putting his son on the road to becoming a man in crisis as he was looking to cope with his divorce. Now, Robert McGaughan, Jason McGaughan's father, again was addicted to gambling at 8 years old and hoped to try to build a family where he wouldn't have to deal with that issue. However, after his wife wound up divorcing him and there was an ongoing custody battle between both of them, this is where Robert McGaughan possibly looked to try to cope with that divorce by trying to bond with his son by teaching him gambling. And as Jason McGaughan was being taught gambling by his father and looking to try to deal with his emotional needs that were not met by his mother, he began to look to fill that void, sadly, in the same way that his father did, through an addiction. Now, in my book, The Man Crisis, I have a chapter called Addiction and the Man Crisis, and oftentimes when it comes to addiction, addictions are oftentimes something people do to fill a void inside of themselves, and they look to fill that void inside of themselves by participating in a vice that allows them to escape to a place I call the secret world. Now, Jason McGaughan possibly wanted to go to the secret world to deal with escaping the stresses of seeing his parents fighting and arguing with each other. And in that secret world, it was a place where he felt safe and secure about being the boy and the man he wanted to grow up to be. And gambling allowed him to have an outlet where he could feel safe about being himself. Unfortunately, what he was doing was looking to escape from his problems as related to his parents and his family by going to start gambling. And the gambling made him feel safe and secure, and it also made him feel a rush of power. Because with many beta males, what they do is as they enter the secret world, they go to that place because it allows them to feel the power they can't have as a man in the real world. So they go to the secret world as a private place where they can actually feel that kind of power. And what sadly happened with Jason McGaughan is that as he was in that secret world with his father, what happened was he started to bond with his father over this toxic behavior of gambling. And as they started to bond over times that they spent together playing different games, starting with Yahtzee and Monopoly and games like Ship Captain and Crew and other dice games, Jason McGaughan started to become more interested in gambling, and that interest turned into an addiction because gambling was a place where he felt he could have power, and because he felt like he could actually have power over something and have power and control over something, he felt like this was something that he could do for himself, and this is the only thing that made him feel secure in himself. And sadly, this is what started him on a road to addiction. And this addiction to gambling started to become really bad because as he became addicted to gambling and his father got custody of him at 13 years old, he started getting into different kinds of gambling, such as gambling on the computer. And as he started to get into gambling on the computer, he started to become addicted to the point where he was not doing his homework, sleeping in class, and only focusing on getting the scores of the next sports games so that he could go out here and place bets. And he kept playing these games and placing bets because he was getting a bigger high and a bigger rush. And as he got this bigger high and this bigger rush from gambling, this is where he started to participate in sports betting. And as he started participating in sports betting, he started getting involved with bookies. And as he started to get involved with bookies, he started participating in gambling for more money because he was starting to get a bigger rush from making bigger bets. And as he started getting this rush, he was not only dealing in gambling, he was also participating in possibly dealing drugs to support the gambling habit, because with the money that guys get from drugs, they can go out here and have more money. And it's ironic because as he was selling poison to enable other people's addictions, he was enabling his own addiction. And as he was out here enabling his own addiction, he was further escalating his behavior because he wound up going out and participating in getting a weapon. And what's even said is that as he was out here gambling, he basically was being enabled to participate in gambling by an uncle who was a bookie and an aunt who basically gave him thousands of dollars. And as he got thousands of dollars, he was out looking to continue gambling and continuing to gamble at different places, and eventually started to participate in gambling and places. And eventually this is how he wound up meeting Minju Mark Wu. Now, as he met Minju Mark Wu, eventually they became friends over gambling. And as they became friends over gambling, what happened was Minju Mark Wu and Jason McGuyan basically formed a codependent relationship. And in that codependent relationship, they basically were looking to enable each other's addiction habits, because Minju Mark Wu just came from Taiwan. He came to America, and while his parents sent him here to be able to study for school, what Minju Mark Wu did to try to deal with his anxieties over being in America for the first time was he started gambling. And as both of them wound up gambling and they were going to casinos and participating in gambling, Jason McGuan's behavior continued to escalate to the point where he was just becoming really out of control, and became so out of control that he was starting to steal money from the same aunt and uncle who enabled him. And what was really sad is that he basically got over $250,000 from his aunt over time, and basically has spent so much money with her to the point where he had, again, just blew through $250,000 of his aunt's money that she worked for. And he also further escalated his behavior to the point where he continued to just participate in more erratic and out of control behavior. And this is what happens with people who are addicted. And even at one point, he even tried to, again, possibly try to even hurt his own father, because that's how addicted he was. And people were trying to help Jason McGuan, but sadly he was just so caught up in his addiction to gambling that he didn't know when to stop. And that's par for the course with beta males, because many beta males don't understand the concept of boundaries, because they were never taught male life skills or male survival skills. And because these males were never taught male life skills or male survival skills like boundaries, they don't know where the line is. And because they don't know where the line is, what happens is they get caught up in their addictions, and those addictions get completely out of control. And they get completely out of control because these males basically don't know when to stop. And sadly, Jason McGuan didn't know when to stop. And as he was continuing with his codependent relationship with Minju Mark Wu, and they were enabling each other over gambling, Minju Mark Wu wanted Jason to drop a bet on a baseball game. And what happened was Jason McGuan didn't drop that bet on the baseball game that would have basically helped him be able to pay off gambling debts. And because he didn't put in that bet, this led to Minju Mark Wu, who was already frustrated and angry about his whole smooth world being destroyed because his parents found out about his gambling addiction, winding up exploding in a rage. And Minju Mark Wu wound up exploding in this rage because he needed that money to be able to pay the gambling debts before his parents came and took him home. as related to dealing with his addiction to gambling. But what happened was, since the bet wasn't made, Minju Mark Wu exploded in rage and wound up coming over to the home of Jason McGuan and wound up shooting and killing him and 2 other people over this gambling debt. And then after Minju Mark Wu wound up murdering Jason McGuan, he then was arrested and eventually wound up hanging himself in a jail cell because he couldn't deal with the shame of having to go back to Taiwan and deal with the embarrassment of being a complete failure to his family. And that's the same type of grief that the McGuan family was dealing with as related to Jason overall. And they were dealing with this as related to Jason because he looked like a boy who had a lot of promise when he was young, but sadly all of that promise was taken away because he had an addiction. And the sad part about beta males with addiction is that they have to hit rock bottom in order for them to acknowledge the problem. And sadly, Jason McGuan never got a chance to hit that rock bottom to acknowledge that he had a problem and an addiction to gambling. No, what happened with Jason McGuan, sadly, is he wound up losing his life because of his addiction to gambling. And as he took risks as related to the gambling spot and trying to get the poor man's jackpot, he couldn't see how winning on the lot was going to get him shot. And sadly, he could not begin a road to recovery because he basically was sitting there frustrated in this whole game, trying to play his way out, not understanding the only way out of a gambling addiction is through going through rehabilitation. And this boy sadly never got a chance to get that rehabilitation because he was just so caught up in his addictions. And again, those addictions were the thing that put him on the road to becoming a man in crisis. And he wound up becoming a man in crisis because, again, he never really learned from his father proper male life skills, proper male survival skills, never really learned how to think critically or set boundaries. And because he didn't learn these essential male life skills or male survival skills, sadly, this was what led to him sadly passing away. And what's even sadder is that a younger brother was so devastated that he wound up committing suicide once he heard about his brother's death and was so distraught over his brother being murdered by Minju Mark Wu, allegedly, to the point where he possibly wound up committing suicide. And what's sad is that this father, Robert McGuan, wound up losing 2 sons, and sadly wound up losing 2 sons because he was a man in crisis who never really knew how to deal with coping with his sons, and his whole situation wound up becoming dysfunctional, where he wound up passing on his dysfunction onto his sons, and that led to them leading to both of their demises and basically leading to the end of that entire family's legacy. And it's just really sad to see what happened to the McGuan family, because what happened to the McGuan family, sadly, is what happens when you have addiction. And addiction is one of the things that leads to a lot of men going from being men who can function to being men in crisis. Now, if you want to learn more about what leads to many men winding up on the dysfunctional roads to self-destruction that lead to them becoming men in crisis, you can pick up my book, The Man Crisis, on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find The Man Crisis at other online booksellers like Smashwords, the iBookstore, Google Play, and Barnes & Noble. And if you'd like to see me make more videos about historical men in crisis, you can send a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback. From the author of the critically acclaimed book, The Man Crisis, comes The Woman Crisis. Learn why so many women have become lost in their quest to have it all in The Woman Crisis. Get your copy of The Woman Crisis in paperback at Amazon.com and online booksellers today. Now available for the first time in paperback. Stop Simping in the Workplace. Men, learn what you need to know in order to protect your job from workplace predators with Stop Simping in the Workplace. Available in paperback at online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.